In this introduction, I'm going to give you an overview of the course, what the course is about, some important themes to start off with related to research and the scientific method, and and then I'm going to give you a brief overview of the outline of the course, as well as some of the specific course requirements. So let's begin with what this course is all about. In, in its broadest sense, the course is about evidence, about research evidence that's that can be applied to public policy and management. Research evidence is increasingly required as a part of public policy and management in several forms. For example, performance measurement is a kind of evidence gathering activity in which outcomes and outputs of organizations are systematically measured in order to monitor the performance of an organization and to report to the public and other stakeholders. So this course will be we'll show you how to measure things. We'll talk about concepts that are important for measurement, how to think about a good measurement and what makes for a good measurement. We'll also look at methods of collecting data and sources of data that will give you measurements on important outcomes. So that'll be a theme of the course. We'll also look at ways to evaluate interventions or programs. So program evaluation is increasingly a part of many public and nonprofit activities and programs. Program evaluation essentially looks at whether a program or an intervention has a causal effect on some condition. Does it work? Does it improve things, or does it help ameliorate a problem? And so later in the course, we'll look at cause and effect and what makes for good evidence of cause and effect, and how do we know if an intervention or a program really does cause a desired change in some outcome in the world. And all of this is part of a broader trend across society, but particularly in government and the nonprofit sector, a push towards evidence-based policy and management, a sense that we need to know more about what really works and what doesn't work, and that kind of thinking or that kind of planning should be based on evidence. So again, the course is in many ways about evidence and what makes for good evidence. The course is, in order to figure out what makes for good evidence, you need an understanding of methods or research methods. Methods are the way in which research evidence is produced. It refers to the techniques and procedures that produce research evidence, such as sampling strategies, measurement instruments, plan comparison, statistical analysis. Methods are the activities, the strategies, the techniques that are used to produce research evidence. And so in many ways, this course is about understanding those, understanding the variety of methods that are available, and also the strengths and weaknesses of the particular methods that are used to produce evidence. So why does this matter to you? Well, if you're going into a career as a researcher, you would obviously need to know this kind of material, and some of you may go into research as a career. But even if you're not going to do that, if you're more interested in public policy and public management, methods matter a lot because of the reasons I mentioned earlier: performance measurement, program evaluation, the push for evidence-based policy. But it's also important in general to be an intelligent user or critic of research evidence. No matter what field you're in, research evidence is used to argue for or against certain initiatives or spending priorities or policy changes. You're going to be a part of that process. And so being a sophisticated user or critic of research evidence is an important skill, just to be an effective member of an organization or effective participant in the policymaking process. evidence can sometimes mislead, so it's important to know how evidence can sometimes mislead you. You don't want to be fooled by a study or duped by evidence that may not be as solid as it first appears. So again, this is part of being an intelligent user or critic of research evidence, to understand how it can sometimes mislead you. And finally, as apart from going into a career in research, it's increasingly important in the public and nonprofit sector to have analytical skills that are related to or allow you to produce your own research evidence. And so this is also a skill building class. You'll learn how to develop logic models as a way to kind of represent the program or an intervention and how it produces a desired outcome. Logic models will also give you the skill of being able to identify key indicators or key variables to measure. You'll develop the skill of designing a survey and how to collect data and develop your own original data collection process for monitoring a program or assessing needs or evaluating an intervention. You'll learn some statistical skills in this class. We'll do a bit of regression analysis, which is probably the most widely used method of analysis in applied social and policy research, and we'll do that using Excel. So you'll develop some hands-on statistical analysis skills. You'll practice those. And finally, you'll develop the skills in knowing how to read and interpret published studies in your field. That'll be a skill we'll practice throughout the course. We'll read many studies. This course is about research, but what is research? What do we mean by research, and what are its characteristics? So it's important to get a sense of this, because it'll give us a realistic view of what we're going to see in this course and in the studies we look at. First of all, we're talking here in this course about primary research, not sort of what's sometimes called secondary research, the kind of research you would do in a library or for a research paper in school. We're talking about the production of original research. It's called primary research, meaning that it's the activities, the methods that are used to produce the research that then goes on to be published or to be included in a report, and not the kind of research you would do in a library to look up facts or information that's already available. So we're going to look at the original methods that produce primary research. Research comes in various shapes and sizes. There are all kinds of studies. There are very large scale surveys, some that are international in scope that involve dozens of countries. But at the same time, there are very small lab experiments that involve only a handful of participants, and there are qualitative studies and quantitative studies. There are field studies, observational studies, planned interventions, and so on. So there's a great variety of research, and that's very important to understand. There's no one size or flavor of a study that's particularly defines research. Research in some ways is really defined by a great variety of studies. Even on the same topic, there can be a great variety of studies. And research is not perfect. It's unrealistic to expect a study to be perfect. All studies have their strengths and weaknesses. Just because a study, though, is not perfect, because it has imperfections, doesn't mean that it's not useful. If we threw out every study that was imperfect, we'd probably we'd throw out all the studies that we have, and there wouldn't be much to go on. So it's important to have sort of a realistic view. Studies have flaws, they have weaknesses, but they can still be very useful. So it's very important to have this skill of figuring out the strengths and weaknesses of a study, so you can use what's best in it and also interpret it with the appropriate caution for whatever weaknesses exist. Research is often uncertain and contingent. Just because a study has been done doesn't mean that we know for certain that the results are completely clear and unambiguous. There are always uncertainties. There are statistical uncertainties. There are uncertainties about cause and effect. And that's just a characteristic of research evidence, that it comes with a certain dose of uncertainty that we have to take into consideration. And research is contingent, meaning that it's usually bounded in space and time. It applies to certain people, certain contexts, and it's rarely are studies definitive but at the same time, again, they can be useful even if they're not completely definitive. Studies aim to generalize, even though they are contingent. They aim to inform beyond the context of the people or the situation that was actually studied. So another way to say this is that studies aim for generalizable knowledge. At the same time, they do have this characteristic of being uncertain and contingent, yet studies strive to produce generalizable knowledge. So in a way that sounds like a bit of a contradiction, but it's the way research works. We try to study particular people and situations in order to develop more general knowledge about how the world works. This is very important. Research involves bits and pieces of a larger puzzle. So it's unrealistic to think that any one study is going to answer all our questions. In fact, in most areas of research, we give the example in the book of global warming, but we can think of obesity, the studies of obesity, how children learn, what are the causes and strategies for controlling crime. Almost any important area of human knowledge or of policy relevance, the evidence that exists for that area of interest are multifaceted. There are many studies, many bits and pieces of information, and they together form the body of evidence for that area. So I think it's very important for you to think in terms of research evidence as being a collection of studies, a collection of pieces of evidence that combined give a sense of what's really going on. So any one study is just a part of that larger puzzle, and we're going to kind of approach research in that way. Research, importantly, it involves competition and criticism. Research findings are sometimes conflicting. Research teams sometimes disagree with each other. Individual researchers critique or compete with each other. And that's very important, just generally as part of the scientific process, as we'll see in a little bit. But it's also a characteristic of evidence in any field that you might be interested in, that there isn't necessarily a neat consensus, that there are competing views about what's going on and competing evidence. And research can be both quantitative or qualitative or a mix of both. So in this course, we'll look at qualitative studies and quantitative studies. The course predominantly focuses on quantitative methods, but early on we'll look at qualitative methods and we'll integrate the qualitative perspective throughout the course. And finally, research can be applied or basic. Most of this course will focus on what's called applied research, research applied to public policy, public management. But it's important to note that there is a great deal of basic research in the sciences, but also in the social sciences, research dealing with basic physical or chemical or biological processes or basic psychological processes. You can think of basic research maybe as being more academic research. Applied research is research applied to actual problems or issues or policies in the more in the real world, and that's